In this episode, we talk to journalist and author Ruby Warrington about her new book, Women Without Kids, The Revolutionary Rise of the Unsung Sisterhood.
This is a truly amazing conversation where we dive into what it means to not have children and why it's often deemed sad or selfish. We explore what Ruby calls the motherhood spectrum, and also we dive into our own personal family stories.
The episode brings an incredibly diverse perspective to women without children, and we very much hope you enjoy it. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. How are you all? Well, I don't know when this is going to be going out, so I can't say what we're up to or what we've been up to like we normally do.
Well,
we've been up to lots.
Quite a lot. Actually, this will probably be out in early May, as we're recording this at the end of April. And we have just said that in May, we're going to be doing a midlife makeover month with loads of free events for people.
Oh, James, he does this every time. We have one conversation about what we might do, and then he announces it to the world.
Well, now you're committed.
It's a typical Sagittarius, where he just fires a million arrows, and the Virgo in me has to go around collecting them, making them happen.
No, in all seriousness, we have talked about the possibilities. Many of you have asked us when we're going to do virtual retreats again. Because everyone's getting the memories popping up when we were doing in bank holidays in lockdown and doing virtual retreats. So we think we will do another little retreat.
We will, because we've given in and you ask us. So your wish is our command. We will be doing like a virtual retreat, some workouts and workshops and guest speakers and all that sort of stuff. So we are looking forward to doing that because we like connecting with you. We don't do it enough.
Anyway, on this episode, we are thrilled to be joined by author Ruby Warrington, who has just written the book Women Without Kids, and who we saw giving a most fantastic talk at Soho House just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Ruby, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We are super excited to have you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you.
So let's just rewind, because actually James, so James was so sweet. He knew that I would want to come to that event at Soho House, and he knew that we had already said like we definitely want Ruby on our podcast because she's talking about stuff that's super relevant to us and actually our audience. So he booked to go and be at this event, and he turned up, and my goodness me, Ruby, like absolute credit to you. Like it was, honestly, listeners, I've never seen a room so packed. It was heaving, full of women. And then James was there, and his little face.
I was shifting somewhat uncomfortably in my seat. I have to. I thought, no, I will stay, and I'm so glad I did, because I took so much from it as well. It was. I felt really honoured to be in that space and hear the stories.
I'm so glad that you came as well. You know, it's making me think about a DM I got on Instagram just yesterday. Somebody saying, please, I'd love to hear you speak more about the experience of men without children. And I kind of replied saying, yes, I think that actually there's a brother book to this book, Women Without Kids, that does need to speak for this audience too. But I was actually searching in my mind for like, which men are in this space talking about being men without kids? And I can't honestly think of a single man who is speaking about what it's like to be fatherless, like not fatherless, like a non-father, right? So I just think it was a real moment of, because this book is called Women Without Kids, and there's so much to say that's so specific to women's experience. I shied away from, or decided not to, kind of consciously start bringing in the experience of men speaking about what it's like for men not to have children. But yeah, I do think it's a huge missing piece. There was already, the conversation about being women without kids is already sort of missing from the mainstream narrative, let alone being men without kids. So yeah, I say all credit to you. And yeah, that book needs to be written too, James.
It does. Actually, after that talk, I was actually reflecting. I was thinking, wow, I'm in so many men's groups, and kind of my age. I think from mid-30s onwards, they all focus really strongly on, you know, being a better dad,
Right.
dad this, dad that,
Yes.
and it's common. There's a really common theme, and I was like, wow, there's actually I haven't seen, and I go to look for a lot of men's groups, any for men without children.
Yeah.
There isn't anything, but I also think that's so telling about how much of an expectation there is for women to become mothers, where men not being fathers is not seen as unusual or outside of the norm. Although, as you were pointing out, there is such an emphasis, particularly when you start talking about being a better man or being a conscious man, on fatherhood. And it is assumed, I think, that men will be fathers, but we don't see it. We don't see men without kids in the same sort of as being deviant in a way, in the same way that we see women without kids as deviant.
I love that about the book and the talk, because I think it is, I know Claire's obviously got experience of this, of feeling like that odd one out, right? As you get, I guess, to your 30s and beyond, it's suddenly like for the females in the group, it's like, oh, are you going to have kids? Oh, why not? Or why haven't you got kids? And I think, as all the amazing women on your panel referred to, feeling in some way like an outsider, almost like unconventional.
But I'd like to say, like, thank you, Ruby, for opening up the conversation even between James and I, because we're blessed that, you know, we're both divorced and we didn't have children, so we didn't bring children into the relationship. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Because our baby is our business. That's the legacy. You talk about the legacy. That's the legacy that we want to leave in the world. But it opened up a conversation between James and I, where I actually said to him, I'd never asked this question before. Do you feel weird and an odd one out being a man without children in your friendship group? And he said, actually, I do a bit. And I thought, well, how bad on me that I've never asked him how he feels about being in all of his friendship groups. All of his friends have children, but being the guy without children.
Yeah, it's been the same with my husband too. There's been so much emphasis on me not having children throughout our lives. And obviously my background's in journalism. And as I write in the book, like, I was asked to write about not having children multiple times during my 30s. And but no one ever really thought to ask Simon. Because I think it's just, if a man doesn't have children, it's just seen as, okay, well, that's not what he wants for his life, and that's fine. We don't have to think about it. But he similarly, now that we've had deeper conversations about it, has expressed feeling slightly, not so much an outsider, but as if maybe there's something missing, or as if people judge him as being maybe immature or not having fulfilled his proper role in society, some of the same sorts of judgments that women without kids experience. So I do think that's a really important conversation to start having too, you know.
And what was beautiful was that as we walked out of the room, and James wrote a post about this, and I cannot tell you, I shared it on my page after your event, and we tagged you in, and he shared it, and then I shared it on my page. There were hundreds of women that jumped in saying, James, that's awesome that you went to something like that. Because the women that, when we left the event, there were 2 women that just said, thank you for coming to the conversation. Otherwise, it's like an echo chamber.
Right. And it also comes back to this idea that child rearing is a woman's issue, when actually child rearing and parenthood impacts both sexes equally, you know. And so, yeah, but again, it's just sort of shining a light again on the fact of how much we think about this as a women's issue. This is something for women to be concerned about, something for women to carry the sort of emotional labor of, not let alone the physical labor of. And it sort of writes men out of the picture, which in some ways is a kind of a get out of jail free card, you know, when there's not this same emphasis on, like, if you're not home cooking dinner every night, that doesn't make you a bad dad, but it makes you a bad mum, right? But then on the other hand, it just kind of diminishes or just glosses over the fact that men might also have feelings of having missed out on something, of being judged by their peers, of being seen a certain way by society, of wondering if they'll regret not having children, which I'm sure is part of, you know, men's experience too. And you know what's so interesting? I've really noticed a trend recently. so I think this can be a real sticking point in couples, and I definitely have met quite a few people who have broken up when one wants to have a child and the other doesn't. This can really be a kind of make or break situation in relationships. I'm so fortunate as well that my husband has been on the same page as me, like from the word go. We haven't ever had to confront that. If anything, even though I knew I never wanted to be a mum, I was sort of almost trying to talk him into wanting it at one point, hoping that he would then talk me into wanting it. But anyway, but yeah, what I've noticed more recently, and I think this has actually been impacted by the pandemic, is that typically, in fact, almost across the board in heterosexual couples, it's the man who wants to have children and the woman who is questioning whether that's what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that again it shows a heightened awareness among women about how much, even though we've made so many advances when it comes to gender equality, when the fat lady sings,
Yeah,
it is the woman who's going to be doing or expected to do the majority of the kind of hands-on child rearing work.
yeah. And actually is the one that's more judged, right? When we
Absolutely.
when we stand up and say, I don't want children.
Yeah.
I think you touched on something very important there, you know, the kind of, however far we've come, the societal cultural norms are, and these are something you talk about in the book, you know, it is majorly women that are impacted by having a child. They're the ones that end up taking the time out of their careers. So they're not advancing as fast. They're taking the time out to raise a child. They're the ones that do the childcare, the school runs, you know, on the whole. I mean, they're more balanced, but still it falls to the woman. Do you think that's why there's still so much judgment about deciding to be childless, and we have the phrase, you know, being selfish about not having children?
Yeah,
Yes.
I've got to talk about what the name of the was going to be. Honestly,
Yes.
Ruby, I didn't know. I literally had such a girl crush on you when you said at the front of the stage, and you just said the word just like out like that, and I thought, wow, this is great. So the book was potentially at one stage going to be called You're a Selfish CUNT, for listeners out there. We're not going to say the words out loud because it might offend, but it's I wanted to mention that because I thought this woman is just wicked, she's amazing, but just saying it out loud in front of everyone without any shame, and that's an amazing thing. But also because that's what came through you, right? It was like, we're selfish. You're either sad, kind of witchy old woman with cats, or you're incredibly selfish.
Right. Yes, thank you for drawing attention to this. So the title was actually just going to be Selfish C Word. But in the end, I decided not to use it, almost for that very reason. The fact that in certain circles and on certain platforms, you can't actually say that word aloud. Like the New York Times, I think they've actually banned that word from being printed in the paper, which is just, I knew that from a marketing perspective, it wouldn't be sensible to call the book Selfish C Word. But yes, it came through very powerfully when I decided that I wanted to research and write on this subject. And I was sort of in my early 40s at the time, was sort of looking ahead, honestly, to menopause and sort of contemplating that phase of life and how that would be for me. And this can be a time where, for people who've been on the fence about having children, really reaching or thinking about, okay, this is actually the end of the biological clock. This is going to stop. This is coming up soon now. This can be a panic moment of, oh dear, I actually really do want this. I coined the term in the book, which sounds a little unkind, and I don't mean it that way at all, but last minute mums. And I've seen this multiple times in my friend group. There are many celebrity examples of this. Women who are in their early 40s who've been like, oh, wait, yeah, shit, we are really going to reach the end of potential for this. I should get with this because I do want to do it. And having IVF and all sorts in their 40s, and many of them having children in their 40s. But for me, it was really the opposite. It was just no sense of regrets, just relief that I'd been able to stay true to what was my own intuition around this, and also immense gratitude that I had got to live the life that I know is my life to live, and that I had actually come of age at a time and in a culture where, as a person born with female reproductive organs, I had the option to make all kinds of choices for my life and to really pursue the things that I wanted to. And then almost immediately what came through was, what a selfish C word.
Yeah.
And I was shocked, honestly, that was that was where my brain almost immediately went as I contemplated the fact of how lucky I'd been to be able to live a life that really suits me, where I'd got to pursue so many of my interests and do the things I want to do. And it was just, again, a real indicator of how, despite all of the advances in terms of gender equality, I think for women especially, living a life entirely on your terms, with complete agency and freedom over how you spend your days, where you put your energy and your resources, the things you want to pursue, the relationships you want to have, the places you want to go, makes you selfish, and specifically the C word piece coming in, the fact that once you have a child, so many of those doors will be closed off to you.
Yes.
Because, not least because, again, so much of the child rearing labor does fall to women. And that once a woman becomes a mother, it is a loss of freedom. It is a loss of privilege in many ways. It's a loss of agency in a way that it isn't for fathers necessarily, So yeah, part of that is biological. Obviously, women gestate, birth, nurture infants. This is, of course, there's going to be a stronger connection and a potentially a stronger bond, and it sort of falls naturally to women to do the majority of the caregiving in those very early infant years. That said, I mean, there are, we now have same-sex male couples raising infants and dividing the caregiving labor equally, and that's becoming less and less stigmatized as well. So it's, as much as there is this biological component, one thing that makes human beings unique to other animals and other species is that we have the capacity to override our biology with our psychology and with our conscious actions. Other animals don't necessarily have that capacity, and that's why humans have thrived and risen to the heights, the top of the food chain that we have, and become so dominant on the planet. But so yeah, I think it really showed, the fact that potential title came through so quickly just showed how far there still is to go when it comes to gender equality, and that actually this issue of motherhood is where we really see that at play. We really see that in play, the inequality that still exists.
And I was saying, as you were talking there, something just occurred to me. It's really interesting that we don't tend to put a value label on people that have children. That's, in inverted commas, normal. But we do make these value judgments, or society makes value judgments about people or women who don't have children. I think that's really interesting.
Yes.
But, it's a choice one way or the other, but one has a value judgment attached and the other doesn't.
Yes. Although there is the whole idea about, you're a mother, but are you a good mother?
Yes.
Being a bad mother is almost as bad as being a selfish C word, I think. Yeah. And that's why I think so many mums have read and loved the book as well.
Yes.
Because it makes them feel like, oh, what if this isn't supposed to come naturally to me? Like, what if it's okay that sometimes I really don't enjoy it? What if it's okay that sometimes I wish I could give my kid back?
Yeah.
Because I think so many mums experience those feelings. But because we have this idea that motherhood is every woman's like biological imperative, her natural role, and the thing that will bring her most fulfillment, most satisfaction, and where she'll really find her true self, that's the kind of messaging we get. If you don't then experience those things after you've become a mother, I think that can be very shame-inducing as well.
Absolutely. And it's you saying about, that's why you think mothers have enjoyed reading your book so much. What I loved about the event, and what I love about the book, is you talk about this thing called the Motherhood Spectrum. And at the event you had an amazing panel of people that just had very different reasons for choosing not to be mothers, but actually also a person that was there that was still contemplating it and still struggling with it slightly, which I just thought was amazing. So the Motherhood Spectrum, can you just explain a little bit to our listeners what you're talking about when you say that?
Yeah, totally. So I also use the term the mummy binary.
Yes.
Which is can be applied to sort of mothers and non-mothers, where you have mothers who are natural, they're doing the right thing. Like I said, they're on the path to happiness and true fulfillment. They will have a happy old age where they're surrounded by their loving offspring. And then you have non-mothers who are selfish, deviant, maybe career obsessed, or somehow defective or damaged, you know? And it struck me that actually that is not a true reflection of how people feel about motherhood and their experiences of motherhood, and that actually this exists on a spectrum. That is, any individual's desire and aptitude for parenthood is actually subject to multiple influences, everything from our personality to the family we were raised in, to the culture we were raised in, to our career aspirations, to our financial situation, to our relationship status, etc., 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 to our mental health, to our physical ability, everything. All of these factors, all of these kind of like identity factors play into our feelings about becoming a parent, and what is also called our parental readiness, like our actual ability to take on the responsibilities of the role. And I present this as a sort of a spectrum and invite readers to kind of like really reflect on all the different influences that have informed how they feel about becoming a parent, how they maybe feel about being a parent, their experiences of being mothered, of mothering, etc., etc. And also pointing out that where we orient on that spectrum might change at different points in our life as our circumstances shift and change as well. And I think that's just a really freeing concept, because it makes neither motherhood or non-motherhood right or wrong, and really shines a light on the fact that this is an incredibly individualistic subject. You know, what works for one person isn't going to work necessarily for somebody else, and vice versa. And that's okay. And that's sort of part of being human, you know. So yeah, that was the motherhood spectrum, because then also there's a secondary mummy binary, which exists between the ones who can't have kids, i.e. the ones who tried their best and very sadly, you know, maybe due to fertility issues, were unable to have the children they desperately want, and the ones who won't have kids, who are, again, selfishly, misguidedly deciding this is not for me.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you have a list of questions. So the book's amazing. It really is, Ruby. And the questions were very confronting, even for me. And that's good. You know, I say even for me when I'm, you know, I've already decided, I've made my decisions. It's not, it's always been something that I am. You know,
Yes.
in the 20s, there was a few moments where I thought, do I want them? Do I not? But essentially, it's always been, and you write about this. I think you relate it to your freckles, you know, like it's
just part of who I am.
It's part of me. It's like my freckles, part of who I am as well. But those questions were confronting in a very, very good, helpful, expansive way. And I think they will be for everyone else. Just inquiring about where they're at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think that level of self-inquiry is just so important, because it really helps us it can really help us tap into some of the more unconscious drivers that are making us not only feel a certain way, but then act on those feelings in a certain way. And the more consciousness we can bring to how we're feeling, why we're feeling that way, the more consciousness we can bring to the actions and the decisions that we're making in the world. And ideally start taking actions, making decisions that are more aligned with what we actually truly want and desire at this stage in our lives, you know. And I guess I'm a believer in, you know, the choices that we make today are the most important choices, really, because the choices we make today will help to shape our circumstances going forward. And ultimately, the more aligned our choices are with who we are and what we want today, the more likely we are to kind of quote unquote end up in the place that's right for us without regrets, you know.
Without regrets,
or with as few regrets hopefully as possible.
Absolutely. Sorry.
I want to ask.
I just want to ask like loads of questions all the time and keep jumping in, but I'm very aware that you're also here.
Yeah, I am. I just wondered if there was. This is such a quite a broad spanning subject, and there's all kinds of angles you can come at it from. Was there a particular event or moment you thought, I need to write a book about this? kind of what inspired you really to actually?
Well, like I said, it really was looking ahead to menopause. I found an amazing book on menopause. It was written in 1992 by a woman named Gail Sheehy. She had a big bestseller in America called Passages. People might have heard of that book. Passages is about these big life transitions that we all experience and how to navigate them. And she then followed up with a book called The Silent Passage, which was specifically about menopause. And she was reframing. I mean, how radical must have this been in 1992, considering we're having a big kind of like rebrand of menopause currently.
I know.
But 30 years ago, you know, she was framing menopause not as the end of a woman's kind of life, but the gateway to her second adulthood. And this just seemed so exciting to me, the way she described it, the way she described this kind of like the end of PMS, no more emotional roller coaster. I was just like, you know, increased energy and creativity. And I was just like, bring it on, which was so not how I had been taught to think about menopause, particularly because menopause is the end of the ticking of the biological clock. This is your last chance. This is it. This is when it's game over if you haven't had a child. So that moment was the real moment for me. I actually found the book on a beach, like literally washed up on the beach. It was really amazing. Meant to be, yeah. And I literally just picked it up, started reading that afternoon on the beach, and by the next day I was very excited about menopause, which was shocking to me. I don't know how excited I'll be when I'm actually in the thick of it, but who knows? At least I'm excited about what lies on the other side of the actual transition, which obviously can be very difficult. But that book I highly recommend it. It has dated really, really well. It feels incredibly relevant. It's very readable. She gives tons of advice about HRT and like all sorts of things. It's just really, really well done.
It's amazing. So one of the things that I really noticed in the book was just how open and honest and brave you are, Ruby, actually, talking about your own experiences. And a lot of them really touched me. Some of them are similar to mine. And you're very, very open and honest about lots of things. One of the things that really touched me as well was about your family background and doing the family constellation, which I love. That was really funny because we've both done family constellation.
Right.
You kind of like understand that you're like, oh, that makes sense. But it's this whole generational, this is what I'm particularly fascinated with, is the generations of women that have come, well, and men, but the generations of women that have come before us and what that's meant for where we're at this time in history, us women, and whether we have an opportunity to heal those generational wounds from the women before us, and asking those questions about, might that be why we're not just jumping straight into motherhood? So that's not really a question. It's a opening of a conversation, really.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you enjoyed that part of the kind of whole conversation that I present, because it's by far the most woo-woo, and I definitely have quite a woo-woo side. But largely because I've found such huge benefit from engaging with therapies like family constellations therapy, and just have given me such incredible insights that have been really, really helpful in, I don't know, just feeling more confidently myself, but also healing my relationships. Like, I've really noticed a huge impact. Writing this book has really helped to build some bridges between my mother and I in ways that I couldn't have foreseen, you know? So yeah, I kind of talk about, there's a chapter where I talk about how when you don't have children, no matter which way you look at it, something is ending with you. And this is something people will often hear from their families. Who's going to carry on the family name? You know, that's the kind of top line. But it really is. It's true. Yeah, something's, and this branch of the family tree is coming to a stop, right? And I think that can feel a little sad and lonely in some ways. But I again flip that, and I'm like, what if this means that on some level, by deciding not to have children, or even if it hasn't been possible for us to have children, that means we've signed up at a soul level to maybe end some karma in this life, or bring some cycles of intergenerational trauma or family dysfunction to a close. And what if I can consciously decide that that's something I'm going to engage with in my life? What could I potentially be passing back to the women, the mothers that came before me in my lineage. I think it's a really powerful concept. It's a little bit out there, but I think I can see you're kind of like you're feeling it. And I just want anyone who's even dipped their toe in the concept of legacy work or, you know, lineage work or ancestral trauma will perhaps find something that resonates in that concept, you know. And like I said, like I'm beginning to see by being so vocal about it, by really choosing to bring it fully into my consciousness, and actually being in a very lucky position to be able to have some of these conversations with my mother while she's alive, I'm already seeing the benefits of bringing that attitude to my childlessness.
It's amazing. I'm like, I mean, everything you've just said, it lights me up, because I do think it's important work, and I don't want to put the label work on it, because that doesn't feel right either. But I think it's definitely at a soul level, and that's the only way. You know how you explain it with your freckles? It's just part of who you are. It's just part of who I am. Not wanted to bring children in this world for some reason that I don't always understand. I can't quite comprehend, but I think it's got something to do with healing what's gone before me.
Right. I mean, I learned, and I started having some of these conversations with my mum in honestly the decade before the book came out. I was kind of in the midst of it while I started writing the book, but I'd learned so much just about really awful stories of unnecessary suffering amongst the mothers in my lineage, you know, a lot of mental illness, a lot of people being abandoned, having their children taken away from them, just a lot of pain and suffering. My mother lost her mother when she was 18. And it just sort of felt like, yeah, we don't need to keep replicating that. You know, there was almost like there was something in me. And that's not to say that I wouldn't have, I'll never know if I would have replicated more of the same with a child. And also I think that increasingly there are parents who are having that level of awareness for their own family dysfunction and actually consciously bringing that to their parenting with the aim of kind of like undoing those patterns in their relationships with their children, which I actually think my mum did a lot of that with me and my brother. So I credit her with that. And I sort of almost make the case that, well, she did that work, which means she was the kind of really the one completing this cycle. And then I am the product of that, you know?
Yeah. And I think we were just lucky that we were in a generation where we could be together like this and witness this shift between feeling deviant and actually now feeling like we're part of a sisterhood.
Right. Yeah. So the subhead is the revolutionary rise of an unsung sisterhood. And that's something I felt so strongly in that room at the event, just this real craving for women without kids to find each other and to know each other and to like be united and to just share in these experiences together, you know?
Definitely, that's something that came out really strongly at the event. I think so many women were commenting afterwards or in the Q&A that, wow, they felt like for the first time they didn't feel they were out of the ordinary. They didn't feel like the odd one out. It felt so good to be part of that community. So well done for opening that conversation up and starting to create it. You know, that's amazing.
But I just want to say something to that. So I have always felt like the only one, the odd one out, right? The anomaly. Get this. In the US, almost 50% of women over 45 don't have children. Almost 50%.
Nuts. Why?
Which is like not a marginalized like group of demographic, right? And also in January this year, the number of women who haven't had a child by the age of 30 reached over 50% for the first time since records began in 1928. So that means that, well, we know that women are having children later, but for it to be a majority now of women who are not having their first child until after the age of 30 definitely suggests that a larger number of women will not have children at all. So because the later women leave it to start having children, the fewer children they'll have. So these statistics show that while we still feel like the odd ones out, we're actually not. Women without kids are everywhere.
Everywhere. I love that. It's just like everywhere. Stop. Let that we're everywhere.
We're everywhere.
We're
everywhere. And you know what? society's doing okay. There's
Yeah.
still like plenty of people around. The population is still growing.
I know we don't need to panic about the population just yet, do we?
We don't, no.
Ever increasing numbers on the planet all the time.
Right.
Yeah, it's really like, it's so interesting what you said about just feeling marginalized. And again, what I came to that event thinking was, but I don't feel any different. Like it's not been a bit, I can't remember who said this on your panel. It's not been a big thing for me in my life. I haven't felt really judged by it, actually, because it is part of who I am. It's just like, I thought, oh, well, Claire's just not going to have children, that's fine. But it's when it gets down to the granular detail, actually. And for me, it's things it's the smallest things. It's like when we talk about, because I'm very spiritual and woo-woo. I hate the word spiritual, but I'm very woo-woo. So when we talk about Mother Earth and the birthing, all the archetypes and the mother archetype, and that's actually, I never realised that's quite triggering for me.
Interesting. Yeah. I used to really not like the whole kind of divine feminine concept, because that seemed so tied to the idea of being a mother, or that if you weren't a mother, you would never really kind of like come into your full divine feminine, you know?
Yes. Yes. Well, I don't know if you were about to say something there, but yeah. And then even like when I opened up the conversation on Facebook a little while ago, because it's something that's fascinated me, this conversation that we're having, and the book you've written, it is something that's always fascinated me. Are there other women out there? And should I even say it? Should I even go out there on Facebook and say that this is a thing? Because I don't want to seem like I'm moaning about it.
Right.
I don't want to seem this. I just want to seem like I'm a nice woman, you know.
Yeah.
Don't want to rock the boat too much. But loads of people underneath my comments were like, this is exactly how I feel. This is exactly how I feel. And even in the working environment, that came through really clearly. I have to stay late because my female counterparts have children, and they will make comments like, well, I've got to go and pick up my kids. You haven't got kids, so you can stay late. Or what have you got to be stressed about? You don't have children. Or of course your body, I get this with my physique. Of course your physique's like that, Claire, because you haven't had children.
Wow. Oof.
Mind-blowing.
That kind of divisiveness is really toxic, and that's that mummy binary in play, you know, this idea of us and them, when I think there is the idea that all people without children, again, this comes back to the selfish tag, are just living these kind of lives of luxury and ease where we don't have any issues really, and nothing is really bothering us. There's nothing to really bother us, and like we can just do what we please when we like. And I mean, undoubtedly having kids is really stressful.
Yeah. Well, from personal experience, we see that, we joke about it, you know, with extended family and friends. It's always like, oh, well, you two haven't got kids, so you have to fit around everyone else. Why haven't you been here? Why aren't you coming to see them? They've got kids, it's not as easy. And you're like, wow, it's like we've got nothing going on in our lives. We're just sat at home with our knitting or something.
Exactly. And I think it's a bit of like, there's a balance there, because yes, parents, especially parents of young children, are a lot more time strapped, and they don't have as much spare cash probably, and these sorts of issues are very real. But it doesn't mean to say that people who don't have children don't have big concerns, stresses and dramas of their own. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to, and it was, so when I in the research for the book, I sent out an online survey, and about 200 people replied, and I asked in that about people's experience of family dysfunction and whether that had impacted their decisions about not having children. Pretty much, I would say 90% of people identified with that. And there's something, being a child of a dysfunctional family brings its own kinds of stresses, brings its own kind of mental health issues that many, I think, people without children identify with, and are tackling and dealing with, you know? And so, I mean, I'm incredibly anxious person. I have a very low tolerance for stress. And I think this is partly the result of growing up in quite an unstable household. And so, part of my not wanting to have kids is knowing that I don't have the resilience necessarily to kind of deal with those kind of daily ups and downs, and that I would probably have a bit of a breakdown fairly regularly as a result. And I think that's, some people might say, oh, well, you're just like too sensitive, or, you know, toughen up or whatever. And I'm like, no, actually, no, I know myself. this is what I need to be able to function in the world, to be a good daughter, to be a good friend, to be a good auntie, to be a good wife. And I actually need quite a lot of my energy to look after me.
Yes.
I don't really feel like I have enough left over to potentially look after another small human who's entirely dependent on me for their well-being.
Ruby,
That
like
really resonates,
it really resonates, because it so resonates with me, because I think you said something in the event as well where you were like, I'm not going to phrase it properly, so you're going to have to probably zhuzh this up a little bit, but it was almost like you were saying, the world affects me so much that having a child would affect me even more. And it's almost like I'm so all-encompassing. I might be putting words in your mouth here, but this is for me as well. My love is almost all-encompassing. I would be so uber sensitive about that child and so worried about it. And I find the world quite confronting as it is, and enough to be anxious and sensitive about, without then also having a child.
Absolutely.
So that was my take on what you said. But it was something like that. And I thought, my God, she feels the way I
That
feel.
was the way that it, yeah. And it makes me think about, like, one of the reasons I have never necessarily really liked the term child free is that to me it sounds a bit like carefree. And I really care I kind of care too much. Like, I can't not care, and I don't have a thick skin, and I can't just kind of like shut down and shut out the news and forget and just focus on happy thought. Like, I just can't. And it's one of the reasons I'm a writer. I think a lot of writers and a lot of artists have this sort of disposition. You're just kind of, I'm a sponge for fucking everything.
Yeah.
And writing is my way of processing it and making sense of it, as is a hell of a lot of time on my own. Solitude is like incredibly important to me. If I don't get enough solitude, I really get very quickly to the end of my tether, the end of my rope. And I notice it, like you said, I'm sitting on the floor in my hotel room. I've slept in 11 different beds over the past month. I've just spent 3 days at my brother's house with my nephew. I just have been all over the place, and I can feel I've been sick for the past week. I can feel I'm so grateful now to just be in a hotel room on my own. My husband arrives tomorrow, so I've got him arriving with all his dramas.
Make the most of it.
But I'm just like, oh. And having a child means never being alone. Like, at least for the first 5 years until they start going to school, you really are never alone. And some people are the other way. Some people need people around all the time, and they thrive on that. And again, this is about knowing myself, being okay with how I am and what I need as a result, and making choices that are going to best support me to be me and do my job and like show up the way that I want to show up in the world. And for me, that's a lot of alone time, a lot of time to write, a lot of time to think, which is why I'm a writer. You know, I found my vocation. Other people find their vocation in mothering, and that's okay. Both are okay.
Ruby, thanks so much. It's been fascinating, and the book is, we keep saying, is amazing.
It really is. It really is, and absolutely fantastic.
We'll put a
Thank you
link
for writing
to the book in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. But before we go, Ruby, what is next for Ruby? What's the next project?
Other than some alone
my
time.
God.
Alone
Well,
time.
I'm still in I feel like I'm still in, this has been a very protracted birthing process. I'm still like in it. So yeah, at the moment I'm focused on this book. I have got ideas for other books bubbling. We'll see. But I also still, like, you know, my last book was called Sober Curious, which was all about helping people reframe their relationship with alcohol. And there's still a lot of work that happens around that. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, as I noted, quite looking forward to getting home, getting back to my own bed, getting back to my routine, and just sort of like getting on top of everything. But yeah, in terms of what's next with books, I've got some ideas, but I'm not really speaking about them out loud yet.
Well, this one is fantastic, as is Sober Curious. I know in my alcohol-free group, we always talk about your book. So I'm super excited about sharing that you've been on our podcast talking about this. They all know you from that. So I'm really excited.
Amazing. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your enthusiasm about the book, and for, just sharing your experiences too. It's so validating to hear people reflect back that, yes, me too, because like I said, for so long I felt like I'm the only one, you know.
Thanks, Ruby.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Ruby.
so,
Really
so
appreciate
much.
you being here, and appreciate you writing the book as well, with a really important, I think, message for people, and that feeling that they're not alone and a part of something bigger. So thank you.
It's been a real joy. Thank you.
It's been great.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah.